Hello and welcome to Castle of Horror, the show dedicated to horror movies and awesomeness. This week, we have the second part of our look at the second season of the acclaimed Netflix series Stranger Things. Bear in mind, if you haven't seen today's movie, we're going to be talking about it from the perspective of horror fans who have. So, warning, spoilers ahead. It's a series, and that's why we had to break it into two episodes. From Denver, Colorado, I'm your host, Jason Henderson, author of the upcoming Young Captain Nemo series from Fievel and Friends, Macmillan Books. With me from Austin is Tony Salvaggio, tech director at Rooster Teeth Studio, lead singer and bassist of the band Deserts of Mars, and lead guitarist of the band Rise from Fire. Say hello, Tony.
Howdy.
Also in Austin is Mr. Drew Edwards, editor-in-chief of HorrorMovies.net, writer for Rockabilly Online, and creator and writer of the long-running comic Halloween Man. Say hello.
Hello.
Hello. Also in Denver, as always, color commentary from attorney Julia Guzman of Guzman Immigration of Denver. She's also a member of the improv a cappella vocal group In Harmony's Way. Say hello, Julia.
I'm not going to do it again. Hi.
I was attempting
I'm
that.
not going to. I'll resist.
Yes. Okay, we're here to talk about Stranger Things, created, written, directed, and co-executive produced by the Duffer Brothers. It has a big cast, starring Winona Ryder, David Harbour, a whole youthful cast: Finn Wolfhard, Millie Bobby Brown, Galen Matarazzo, Sadie Sink, Dacre Montgomery, who might very well be Nightwing soon, and some interesting new additions this season: Sean Astin and Paul Shining Lights of the 80s. So we talked about it at length last episode, and now we're back for the second half of season 2 and to recap a lot more of the plot. So let's get our opening thoughts, and let's go, we'll mix it up. It'll go Tony, Julia, Drew, and then I'll go Tony. Opening thoughts, and since this is the last time we'll talk about Stranger Things, summary thoughts in a sense of where this is all leading us. Stranger Things 2 Part 2.
I like it. I like that they kind of went. It's weird. In some ways, it's darker. In some ways, it's not. I think it's a more horror thing, but it also, I mentioned Anna to the Infinite Power and several things like that. I think it's got some touchstones of that kind of sci-fi element as well. A little bit more X-Files. It becomes a little bit of a road trip. There's some superpower hijinks. There's some 80s punks. It goes in a way I hadn't quite expected, and that's pretty cool. So I still really enjoyed it. I'm interested to see where they go from here, but I have faith that it's going to be cool. If it keeps being as solid as this, we're in for several seasons of pretty cool stuff.
Awesome. Julia, opening thoughts.
I said last time that I just think this is such a great series. The second half is, as Tony was saying, a lot darker. There is a lot of drama with 11 kind of pursuing her roots and finding out about just searching for her family and that kind of thing, and then trying to rescue people and keep the Upside Down from taking over our world. So it's there's a lot of interesting stories and a lot of very dramatic moments, and it's just amazing to look at. I mean, I think it's really, like I said before, what they do with the Upside Down is really interesting, and with the shadow monster and all the different effects that they have. So yeah, I think it's really good, and I just love the cast. I just think they're so great. They work so well together. So I really enjoyed it.
Fantastic. Drew, what are your thoughts?
I just really enjoyed this part of it. I enjoyed the first part of it. I enjoyed season 1. This was interesting because they kind of stepped away, not just most of the other stuff on this show is taken from like 80s horror and 80s sci-fi and 80s adventure films. This part of the series also takes a lot from 80s comic books because you see this strong vein of and we kind of touched upon this a little bit last episode, of 80s Chris Claremont X-Men comics in this. And I thought that was so interesting to see that. thrown into the mix, but also, strong elements of aliens in this. It's just a fun, rousing, sci-fi horror mashup. And I agree with Tony. Like, if we get even another season that's half as good as this, we're in for some good stuff.
Thank you. And my thinking, as I thought about this, as we're going into our second week of discussing Stranger Things 2, it occurred to me, if I tried to recap the plot, I would have a really hard time. And I realized it almost doesn't matter. I agree with everything that you said about, they're riffing on some different things than they did the first season. But what makes this, they cleverly have a character actually in this one. Sadie Sink's character actually says the plot's very derivative, but it's on purpose. I mean, that's what's going on. This is, in a sense, a fairly, it is a beautiful looking, it looks expensive. I don't know if it is expensive, but an expensive looking, ambitious pastiche of ideas and thoughts and inspirations coming from a period of time that the creators clearly love, and their success in copying that stuff is what makes it successful or not successful. And I could just watch a whole bunch of it. It doesn't really matter to me. In the end, in fact, in a way, what's happening, and I think that's proven out by the fact that as I think through it, I can sometimes have a hard time recalling exactly how one part of the plot led into another part of the plot. It's more like a series of motifs, and that sounds like a critique, but it's not, because it's a way into, for me, how best to enjoy this particular piece. That it's what is it about? It is about being sort of the most perfect 80s film ever made, and it just doesn't happen to have been made in the 80s. So, okay.
Or be a film.
Yeah, or it doesn't have to be a film. Yeah, and maybe this is the only way to do that. Or in fact, if you've got, in fact, like 10 hours of thoughts of how to do that, then we've now invented a wonderful way that you can do that didn't used to exist. The second half of Stranger Things 2, and we had episodes 1 through 4 last time. This time we're talking about episodes 5. It's actually 5 through 9 instead of, but roughly the second half. Where we pick up, we now have seen Will, who is the sensitive boy who in the last season was kidnapped to the Upside Down. Now he has a psychic link to the evil that is in the Upside Down, and we begin to follow this plot of Will being possessed. So the plot threads going on, we're dealing with Will, who is beginning to show signs of possession after he was invaded by the smoke monster in the last in the last season. Meanwhile, the older teens, Jonathan and Nancy, are working to try to figure out how to let the world know that there's an evil lab that is doing scary experiments with this secret other world that they've opened a gate to. 11, the escaped experiment, is going off to try to investigate her own origins and find her mom. And finally, what am I leaving out? Hopper is trying to figure out what the current administration at the lab, which is led by the sort of morally ambiguous Paul Reiser, are up to, and what threat they pose. Let's talk about the 11 storyline, because it sits alone. It's almost like a series all by itself. Every single episode, we keep cutting back to 11, and eventually she'll curl back into the main plot line, but we can carve out her storyline. So when we first saw 11 this season, she was living with Hopper, and in this one, she has gone off to try to discover her own origins, and the first thing she does is go out in search of her biological mom. Joya, what does she find?
So we had already visited the mom, Terry, who is basically a catatonic vegetable who is being taken care of. And this whole series, I found myself going, is that person a bad guy? Is that person a bad guy? And I was sure that the sister caretaker was actually not even maybe her sister, but just somebody from the lab that was just kind of overseeing her. But no, it didn't seem to be that, or if she is, they didn't reveal it in this series. But anyway, she's being taken care of by her sister, and so Hopper and Joyce have already gone to visit her in the past, and now we see 11 show up, and she is going to be able to break through a little bit with Mom because she knows that the mother's trying to communicate with her through the electricity, because as we know, that's what these guys are able to do, is use electricity to send messages. And so the faulty wiring, as the sister called it in the house, is actually Mom trying to communicate. And so 11 goes ahead and does the psychic connection with her mom, and in all these words that the mom has been saying that just seem kind of nonsensical are actually just memory cues for her of what happened, of the traumatic events that happened when she gave birth to her child, and then her child was taken from her. And then she tried to go and retrieve the child at the lab and was lobotomized, basically. And so all of this, 11's able to see, and now she knows, that's happened.
Yeah. And that's pretty dark. But one thing that we realize is that there are other children like 11 in there, and we see one really clearly. This girl who is number 8. And I don't remember if we catch her name here as Callie, but it's the girl called Callie. And so that's the one that 11 decides that, partly because she's just continuing the mystery, but also I think she wants to find somebody who is connected to her. And so she sets out in search of this girl Callie. So Drew, somehow it seems to me you and Tony will probably have some pop culture observation in Pittsburgh. If you want to take explaining the gang, or Tony can take it, but we should cut to getting to the warehouse where this girl Callie actually is.
Well, the gang, of course, like any good 80s movie, is made up of very, although more ethnically diverse than you probably would have gotten in an 80s movie, but nonetheless, these are punk rockers, including a very postcard punk with a gigantic mohawk who looks like he could have walked off the set of Return of the Living Dead. And they seem, Tony called it last episode, they seem to function a lot like the Morlocks from the old X-Men comics, and I'd be hard pressed to disagree with that assessment. I mean, all this stuff seems very much cut from that, 80s Marvel bread and butter kind of vibe. Like, and I think that was probably my favorite thing about this stuff. I mean, I don't know, like Tony. I mean,
I agree, and I also find it interesting because the main difference is only one of them has superpowers.
Yeah,
but they've been so up until this point they've had to rely on their wits, because basically they're not just some this punk gang doing petty crime. They're actually a murder gang. A revenge gang set to kill the people who were part of this government group, the lab.
Because that's what their leader wants them to do. Right. I mean, in theory, Callie's the only one who wants to go out and murder a bunch of scientists. Right? I mean, the rest of them would probably be satisfied not to do that. I don't know. I have no idea.
Like, obviously the thrill of killing some scientists is completely okay with everybody involved.
Well, and I got the impression that it wasn't just scientists they were killing. I think they each have people that they want to kill that have done them harm. So I think there's a whole list, and her list is the scientist.
That's possible. They talk about that less, but I mean I don't think that theory is outside the realm. Mohawk guy may want to kill his former Square boss or whatever.
The thing that I thought was really strange here, and this is not a critique. I mean, I think you could, as some have, looked at this and felt like it's not as finely drawn as the rest of the series. And if you were to say that, how the hell could it be? It's one episode where you're dropping in on a whole nother bunch of people. But what I thought was really weird here is that it is the only piece of this entire show that doesn't share any of the look or the feel or the rhythm or any of it. And this is and to that extent it's like a weird version of in Gene Kelly movies always had this moment where they would stop and do like an 8-minute dance that was in a completely different style. It was almost like an interlude that would be and that's what's weirdly going on here. They take her to Pittsburgh. 11 is out of the rest of the storyline. There's no more kids on bikes. There's no more all those borrowed shots from ET. Here we're dealing in completely different stuff, and it's
Although
to a great
a lot of important stuff really does happen here.
Oh,
like,
of course.
they establish that Dr. Brenner might still be alive, so
Yep.
they throw that out there. You have, the relationship between 8 and 11, and, 8 kind of trained 11 up on her power set, so you get to see her level up. I can agree with you that in some ways this almost seems like a backdoor pilot for like another series in some ways, because it's you're taken out of like the small town kind of Americana vibe of the rest
Yeah.
of it, dropped into something that it does evoke Return of the Living Dead. It does evoke The Warriors. It's got this much more like urban, slimy,
And it evokes First Class. Just to be clear, I mean, it certainly, when we're up to this point where Callie is like, I know you have amazing telekinetic abilities, and I want you to move that train over there. That it's impossible. Maybe they weren't thinking of it, but it's impossible for me not to think of Professor X and Magneto.
Well, they're totally doing an X-Men thing. I don't think that the Duffer Brothers would even deny that. Like, if you were to say, "Hey, was this inspired by old X-Men comics?" I mean, come on.
Yeah,
like,
sure.
There's no way. And in some ways, I actually feel like this invokes the feeling of reading those comics a lot better than any of the X-Men movies. Like, they really, and maybe it's because it's set in the 80s, but it really does capture that kind of feeling. Like, if you were to go crack open a Chris Claremont, John Byrne X-Men comic from this time period, you would get this particular vibe off of it.
Oh, sure.
Well, they're the way the episode's organized. You watch it and you do get that feel of pure 80s style comic book fantasy. They have a perfect clubhouse, which is this big warehouse that only at the very end is finally invaded. It has power. They decorate it the way they like. They eat takeout food and hang out and play games, and then they go out on their crime spree. It's it is pure fantasy. In a way, this is more of a fantasy. So if you think about it, the stuff in the small towns, like I said, it's very inspired by the texture of like Spielberg around the ET period, but at the same time, it's very finely observed. So that there's class distinctions. There's cassette tapes and there's people hassling one another over money. Whereas as here, this is in a way, this is taking on the look of pure fantasy, and
But it's a grimy kind of fantasy. Like,
yeah,
that's the thing.
absolutely.
Like, another movie I thought a lot about while watching this episode was Escape from New York.
Sure.
Oddly enough, I thought about Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles with their
No, I think that's
warehouse where all the
completely
boys hung out.
fair.
I totally see where you're coming from. And the funny thing is, if in fact they had 6 or 7 episodes of these guys, to some extent, all of that sort of glossy, the broad gloss feel would go away if you had more episodes to sort of focus on each of these characters and figure out what makes them tick. I gotta say, the guy with the mohawk, I wanted to spend just a moment on the specialness of the image of the mohawk I don't have any wisdom about what the actual cultural meaning of a mohawk is, but I can tell you a hell of a lot about what it meant. I can tell you what it meant in pop culture. And in pop culture, it was like the go-to thing for 40-something white men drawing comic books to draw. If you were, if gang, one of those guys has a mohawk, and if the turtles run into somebody, hell, they had like there was actually one of their regular villains had a mohawk. Only in the X-Men, in fact, did you have a good guy with a mohawk, which was really daring and cool. But it was like if Charles Bronson ran into somebody with a mohawk, he had license to kill that guy because those people were not to be trusted. It was a very strange time for people with that haircut.
Yeah, well, I mean, it was super cool, but it was also, it depended on where you were, right? So if it was Chips, they were all bad.
Yeah.
Punk rockers.
That's
But
right.
for other movies or counterculture, like if it was Return of the Living Dead,
Yeah.
then hey, that's the cool people who are outsiders who, if you're an outsider as well, these are our people, right?
Yeah.
To the point where, eventually Storm ends up with a mohawk in
Right.
X-Men in the 80s, right? I mean,
Yeah, absolutely.
let's not
Yeah.
forget she had a awesome like fighting fish mohawk,
It was great. Yeah, no. I was so sad when she traded in the mohawk for a thicker mohawk that was really more like a mullet with shaved temples. That was not nearly as cool as the solid mohawk that she wore. And do you remember why she got the mohawk? Storm got that mohawk because she took over because she lost her powers and she took over the Morlocks. So she went underground.
There you go.
She fought for primacy over the mutant gang, having no powers, and so then she donned Callisto's clothes and shaved her head to look like a Morlock, and then she kept it for years. It was sad, actually. I just revealed that I know probably too much about 1980s X-Men.
I mean,
I was actually pretty
I don't have a
impressed that you were able
problem
to come up with all that.
It's
Absolutely.
also good context.
Yeah.
Where was there was another example of oh yeah, I'm sorry. I'm not being Another example is Mr. T, who
Which he always insisted that wasn't a mohawk. His cultural touchstone was not the same, by the way.
Okay. I can dig that.
But did he call it something different?
I forgot. Oh man. I see where Jason was spot on. I am failing.
Well,
that's okay. We can't also our heads with meaningless trivia.
What Mr. T has is basically a Mohican. What this guy and the show has is a Liberty Spike mohawk, and it's very and that's the thing. This is like a point in time where this would have been way more shocking than I think that it is. Like 30 years of punk rock fashion has, I think, made this all a little more culturally acceptable than it once was. I mean, we see soccer moms with blue hair these days. Whereas back in the 80s, where all this is supposed to be taking place, like this would have seemed like a gang of freaks, even the ones without superpowers.
Yeah.
So, by the way, through the power of the internet, Mr. T cites a tribe in Africa in Mali, and the tribe, the warriors and I don't want to get this wrong, so I'm going to spell it out. It's MANDINKE, warriors.
Oh yeah.
And
okay.
That's he got it from a tribe from Africa. But again, what made it cool in the 80s was if you were counterculture, it didn't matter where he got it. It felt counterculture and cool because his whole getup was, earrings and chains and, socks, but then his like tight fitting leggings and everything looked cool. It was okay. He was part of some counterculture that wasn't your average star, or even at the time blaxploitation star, right?
Right.
And that was
when he first showed up
in his movies. Like,
remember the first movie though, where this was an example of a bad guy becoming a good guy because he was too charming.
Yeah.
Showed up, he was the terrifying and racially tinged Clubber Lang in what was that, Rocky III, I guess. But he was so interesting that and so funny. I mean, Mr. T had such perfect timing with all his crazy lines and his peculiar syntax that they said we can build TV shows around this guy. Mandinka, by the way, was the way Sinead O'Connor sang it. She with so I don't know if that's correct, but that was how she said it. Anyway, so also in this there we have a giant sort of generic giant black guy on the team with glasses, and he's called Fun Size. You've got a girl who dresses like Pat Benatar, and she's just sort of a troublemaker on the run. It's who am I forgetting? There's one more who's not as memorable as as those sort of cartoonish ones. But anyway, we have an entire episode. I mean, a whole episode. Just like how on the X-Files, sometimes you would do a whole episode from the perspective of a character that wasn't a lead. You have a whole episode where 11 is running around with this gang, and then they do establish the things that Drew mentioned, that Matthew Modine might still be alive. And then at the end, it's kind of time's up on that idea. We have a test where 11 powers up. She does some exercises. She gets to know her sort of sister in spirit anyway, who is this girl Callie who runs this gang. She gets trained a little bit, and then like Luke giving up on his training in Empire Strikes Back, she declares that she needs to go back and save her friends, and that is awesome.
She gets a vision of what's
Yes.
going on in Hawkins.
I see
So
them
that
in
is very
pain.
Star Wars.
I see them in pain. I have to go. I have to save my friends. And in fact, Kali says, "No, don't. It's a waste of time." It is so Yoda, basically. That just makes me light up and smile to think of that.
Also, in amongst this, she's had a change of heart as well, because she starts to realize that maybe, despite the fact that a lot of these people should be killed, probably, they're not necessarily worthy that, she meets a person who has kids when they go to kill him.
Yeah.
Also, you're also forgetting, in classic 80s style, there is a montage turning her into a punk gothy.
Oh my God, yes.
Which she adopts. Yeah. And again, very 80s Claremont. There's a Kitty Pryde comics montage where she's picking out her outfits, and
yes,
she was always the Claremont 80s poster child of weird outfits. Just whoever came up with outfits. I don't know if Claremont was dictating that or if whoever was doing the art at the time. He had various artists. They seem to collaborate and create just weird ass outfits for her.
Oh, and absolutely.
This is much more graphic, of course, but there's a whole choosing your look kind of thing that happens, which is
you do. You need a montage.
Yes.
Yeah. She. I think though that she's kind of. I like the Star Wars analogy because I feel like she had the potential to go the way of Han Solo's son Ben and become a total Dark Lord, and instead she kind of goes, wait, no, I need to not go down this road. Even though I have killed people, this is like you were saying, Tony, about how she spares the guy because he has kids. She doesn't feel like this is the right path for her. And I think that's really a neat story. I like that she has met her sister, as she calls her. Like I said last time, each of the kids is paired off with a sibling, and only one, which is interesting. And this is hers. She has her lab rat sister, and so I think that's really neat, and that she's been able to. She does so much growing when she goes off on her adventure, because she meets her mom, she meets her sister. She realizes that maybe just killing people is not how she wants to be, and she realizes she needs to go back and save her friends. And I'm actually thinking, I was talking about what this storyline reminds you of. To me, it reminds me a lot of Buffy. And actually, Jason had talked about before about how the first 4 episodes felt like Buffy, where Buffy's kind of off doing her thing and everybody else is doing their thing. But this also feels like Buffy in that I have to go save my friends, and also when she does return and is reunited with the gang, it's actually a lot to me like the Giles when she does her badass, I'm back
Yes.
thing, and she's just killed one of the demodogs. It reminded me. It reminded me of Giles's entry when Willow has gone all dark and nobody can defeat her, and then Giles comes in and says, "I'd like to test that theory."
Yes.
Throws her
Oh my God,
witch
yeah.
balls at her, or whatever it is. I just thought that was awesome. So that was really great when she's reunited with them. I love that scene.
I mean, sudden returns have been this piece that people have been going to in Hollywood since, I don't know, probably since as long
Sure.
as there's been Hollywood, right? But I mean,
Yeah.
the one, gosh, I've got Star Wars on the brain, I guess, because the one that defined my generation was Han Solo appearing at the end suddenly to blast away the TIE fighters that are on Luke's tail and give him a chance to destroy the Death Star. And yeah, you've got 11 when she finally shows up. It's when things are darkest, and she comes in like like a superhero to
Yeah, that's
defeat
a very
everybody.
common trope, like you're saying. Absolutely.
And she's dressed again, like Tony said, she's dressed like a superhero. She's dressed like an X-Man of the 80s. She's got a weird like wrist glove thing. She's got her hair is now slicked back. She's got, I didn't even notice if she has little skinny belts, but she probably does. I mean,
she has
it's
all the
a
eyeliner.
yeah, she's got the she has gone to the city and she's brought mid 80s citified fashion, punk fashion that's becoming more popular back to the suburbs, because all the other characters in this thing, even this sort of daring and rebellious character Max, all of them dress still like suburban kids. The boys are still wearing terrible, terrible sweaters in this, in this thing. They all wear exactly the same hair. She's the only one who actually has kind of picked up on the fashions of the outside world. I mean, obviously, and that's because of her journey. I mean, it's cool stuff. I don't know out there in the universe how people are accepting this thing, if they're just thinking of it as a backdoor pilot, if they like it, but for me it was a
Well, and
neat interlude.
more than just bringing the city back to the suburbs, it's really just representing a rebellion on a teenage rebellion. Because I lived in the suburbs, but I had a year where I looked just like that, and it's not that I had gone to the city and then come back. It's that I was doing my rebellious thing, and I think a lot of people did that.
What's funny is when I like had ripped up jeans and just everything, I don't think I even really thought about it as rebellion, more of just like, well, I mean, I guess I didn't really fit in with where I was at. And I remember, since it was such a small school, I mean, I think I said it before, my graduating class was 30-something people. When I had ripped jeans and shaved the side of my head, and the principal just, why would you do this? Like, you pointedly called me out, because he knew, like, my stepdad was the math teacher, and I had to have his classes and stuff. And it was a strange, I really didn't think of it so much as rebellion. Obviously it must have been because, I didn't want to be those people around me, but it wasn't as much of an act as I just thought that was the coolest looking, that's what cool was.
It's not rebellion. You're right. It's not rebellion, really. It's identity. It's, you have found a cool identity and you're going to go for it. And it doesn't have to be thought of as rebellion. In a way, it's you sort of breaking free of realizing, hey, I don't have to fit the template. I'm going to be something else. And there are cynical people and say, well, it's a template still that's been fashioned by other people, but it doesn't matter. There's a moment when when the Pittsburgh gang, the Collie gang, is walking after the makeover. And 11 has fit in really well with this gang. And I'm looking at a picture right now of all of them walking together. And by the way, Mohawk guy towers over all of them. He's like he's like half again as tall as 11 and Collie, who are the same height more or less.
He also looks like Mohawk guys from various fighting games of the time, or brawlers.
Yes.
Like, he would fit well into Final Fight, or any Fatal Fury, King of Fighters, name it.
Yeah.
He's he's in there. You're expecting that your hero should come in and pile drive him, or do some kind of roundhouse kick to him, and he would laugh and have his switchblade and maybe lick his switchblade. Ha! It's fantastic.
Lick the switch, absolutely. Yeah, there's he also wears an Anarchy T-shirt, a T-shirt with the Anarchy symbol, which was like really really hot, and he wears a long watch chain, which I affected a couple of times. My brother wore a watch chain all the time, so these are great fashions to be showing off, and we haven't really had a chance to see them because again. At the particular moment that we find all these characters in their small town, those fashions have not quite come to the small town. I mean, in other words, they'll come to that town in like another year and a half, basically. But in Pittsburgh, they're becoming the rage. So it's it is a very fun interlude.
But I think that's exactly when. I mean, that's exactly when we had it in the suburbs, was in 8th grade and 9th grade. Yeah. So I think
in '84,
for me,
I didn't have any of that stuff in '84. I mean,
I just remember. I remember specifically one mutual friend of ours, Jason, who wore eyeliner in 8th grade, a guy, and I just remember. And then like my friend that kind of introduced me to that style was already dressing like that. And then
but I remember that in my sophomore year, which was
no, for me it was 8th and 9th grade is when it was.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, you were just in a bigger town than you were in you were ahead of me. That's awesome. Okay. So
well, I wanted to say something. We talked a lot about last week about the way TV is structured now, and I feel like this episode is a really good example of something. Is these more stylish or like I guess more thought out type shows like this, like Game of Thrones, like Walking Dead, whatever, will, because they have the space, because I mean these episodes are all very long, like some of them are an hour long, they will actually just devote an hour to character development, and I think that's kind of neat, because that is not something we would have seen even 10 years ago, in most TV shows.
Well, I agree with you, and except for that, I do have a couple of good examples of exceptions to that, but it was only when the old model was, if you take like a show like X-Files or Star Trek, if the show was on long enough that people were not afraid of being canceled, then you would go ahead and dedicate a couple of episodes every season to bonkers points of view, or to weird little character stories that didn't amount to much character-wise. But it was only on shows that had so many miles under them that they could get away with it. So Star Trek did that stuff all the time once it was past its like 4th season. But I hear you. I absolutely hear you. And also,
but I think this is a lingering influence of stuff like that. I think it's people who have looked at these shows that have implemented things successfully, because this is becoming more and more commonplace. I mean, not on your like 80s sitcoms or like your procedural dramas necessarily, but on these more like high concept shows, there seems to be a lot more time spent with this kind of thing, and I think that's kind of neat. I like that we're seeing. I mean, some shows are too indulgent about it. I feel like Walking Dead has, like, even though I still enjoy the show, it has episodes upon episodes of stuff like this, and after a while it just becomes boring. But this, because it's only I guess 9 episodes, like this just feels like a neat little, you learn more about Eleven and she develops more as a character, and the focus is really on her, and I think that's kind of neat that this exists.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that's very well said. Yeah, you're totally right. And you also called out the danger that some shows face, where you're like, okay, guys, this is all great, but we really, really need to get back to the plot. Can somebody please get us back to the plot? So yeah, and with Stranger Things, in fact, we should leave 11 there and get ourselves back to the plot, the actual plot that's going on back in Hawkins. We should take it to Jonathan and Nancy. So first of all, what is going on with Jonathan? So Jonathan and Nancy, the two teens, They are, I mean, they're the two older teens. Okay, they're the ones who are basically, I guess, about to graduate. They go off on an adventure of their own to find a mysterious investigative journalist who knows about the weird experiments going on, kind of like the lone gunman in X-Files. They're going to bring him proof that he can then publish and, I guess, they want to expose the lab and therefore get revenge about the death of Barb. But they're also getting closer as a romantic couple. So do you get the impression that Nancy and Steve are going to be broken up by the end of this? Because I'm not actually clear on whether they do or not. I know that's jumping to the end, but we can work our way back to
They
it.
totally break
But
up because of the whole thing with
is that
the
what
party
Steve's talk means when he says, when Steve does his whole "Hey, I was a bad boyfriend and it's okay"? Is he saying therefore I'm breaking up with you? Be free?
He's
Or
saying you broke up with me at the party and you don't remember it because you were drunk, but it's cool. Whatever, it's fine. We're broken up.
Yeah.
Oh.
He's kind of sort of made his peace with it by that time.
Okay. All right. Good. Now, going back again, we have this really cute storyline of Nancy and Jonathan, who are both on this information gathering journey, but they're also on this really cute it happened one night style trip together. Like, it's a long journey. They have to stop and get a hotel room. They sort of cutely each occupy a single bed on either side of this nightstand. Which is sweet. I mean, it's genuinely, it's a sweet story.
I don't know. I found their storyline to be the least interesting of the series myself.
I'm kind of with Julia. Like, it's cool. There's a bunch of cool character moments, but I'm not really invested.
You want to get back to the plot, right?
Yeah, because I mean, also remember, since they're layering this at the same time, you've got them trying to find Hopper, who's been, has gone down into basically the upside down that's exposed to our world, and he's dug himself into there. So there's lots of bits going on that will all, of course, converge later on. So.
Yeah. True. So your point is this is the one that's least attached to what's actually going on right now. Go ahead, Drew.
I liked this storyline. I feel like, though, as much as I thought the conspiracy theorist character was funny, and the actor playing him is great, at this point, as what we were at as a culture, not really wanting to get unnecessarily political, I'm a little over the romanticized conspiracy theorist as a character. I kind of would like to see that trope buried for a little while, because I feel like
say more about that. I'm really curious.
The real world equivalent.
I've never heard this theory. So go crazy. Tell me more.
Well, I mean, we've seen this kind of character a lot through years. I mean, it's ranging from like 70s thrillers to, the X-Files to, here where it's played a little bit more humorously. And I've enjoyed that trope. I mean, I'm not saying that I haven't, but I feel like I look at this and I see like the real world equivalent, which is guys like Alex Jones, and I see how much damage they have done to our country and our culture, and I kind of throw up in my mouth a little bit. Like, I don't really want to see these kinds of guys in hero roles right now. I would be okay with it coming back in a couple of years. And this is nothing against the actor or the way this is written, because it's all funny, it's all entertaining. I'm not saying that it was done badly. I just really I can't deal with this trope right now. It's annoying to me.
I agree with you in many ways. However, the difference between this guy and, like, say, the lone gunman is that they're not a pumped up celebrity. They are actually the same people who would have, they would have been there to bust Nixon, and that's why this works for me. And I get where you're coming from, because I agree with you totally. I think what makes this character different is he's actually trying to thwart the bad guys, as opposed to being a narcissistic sociopath, which is a huge difference.
That's a good point.
So
and that's totally fair.
His stuff is not to elicit a reaction, regardless of how spurious it is. His place in the world is to call attention to the really bad people behind the scenes, which is totally the opposite of what you're rallying against and what I despise with a passion of 1,000 suns. So we're on the same page, but I think his role is different.
I think that's completely fair. I just think everybody looks at whatever narrative they're presented in nowadays. They kind of have a way of twisting that to fit what they need to see it. Like if someone wants to think that they're the last bastion against the commie hordes or whatever, like they're going to be able to twist it around and see themselves reflected in this guy. And
I got you. I mean, I agree. I just think like it didn't bother me as much because, man, oh man, what you're talking about, I abhor as much or more than you do, because
I'm sure
fucking people and a scourge upon the earth. However, this guy is not that in this.
No, and he's presented as more or less like a good, a well-meaning kind of counterculture, hippie leftover. Like I
and again, that's why it works.
Yeah, like, and if you take him just within the context of how he's presented in the show, you're fine. Like, this was totally me bringing my own current baggage to this.
We do that though. That's.
I mean, I think I definitely agree. You're valid in what you're bringing up. Like I said, I just didn't. I saw it more in that last bastion of actual political anarchy and investigative journalism, and not I'm going to tell you whatever you need to hear that will sell my energy.
Well,
drink.
Your radio show. I mean,
there's internet, any energy drink, powder, whatever. I'm going to spin whatever. This guy actually is like the lone gunman, and there are really bad things happening. Let's take care of that. But I agree with you, Drew. Like, I didn't think of it in that same way. And I think it's interesting that
I could extend what Drew's saying, though, because this is a really interesting point, Drew. Because to an extent, what you're saying, it could also be extended to like the fantasy of being Charles Bronson, right? Is there a danger in showing a lot of movies where a middle-aged man has an awesome firearm that he carries around with him to shoot rapists, and he and punks and people that threaten him? It's a fantasy, and I always thought, hey, it's a perfectly safe fantasy. It's okay to want to go watch Charles Bronson shoot punks. But is there a problem, or is it harming our culture? Is it making people feel more at ease or more want to live out that fantasy? And I have no idea. I don't know the answer to that question.
I don't know that I actually feel like that this trope is necessarily harming our culture. I don't know that I would take it that far, but it was not something that I was really in the for, I guess.
Yeah.
Like I get it that look, I'm glad that they went this route with the Barb stuff instead of like we discussed last week, like just resurrecting Barb because everybody loved her so much. Like, I'm glad that they actually made her death have some kind of weight to it. Yeah. So I thought this was a really smart way to handle that. Like, it's good writing. I don't know. Just it was not something I was really in the mood for now. But
I'm with you. I often have plots where I'm like, get back to me in 5 years because I've kind of seen this particular plot enough for now, and then you reach a point where you're like, okay, I'm ready to see that some more, and that's and that's cool. I could, for instance, live my entire life without seeing the Batman origin shown to me again. Not because I'm
like,
so.
If I may, when I'm talking about people being able to twist something to fit their own view, there was a big thing for a while back where neo-Nazis were latching on to the movie They Live, to the point where John Carpenter actually had to like comment on it in a couple of interviews, saying like, that's idiotic, this is not about what they're saying it's about. And if you watch They Live, of course, that's about a working class white man and a black man teaming up, and not a Nazi film by any stretch of the imagination. But people will do whatever they need to do to twist fiction to fit their own narrative. And I
Well, they
feel like that
love
could be done here.
the Nazis, just like I think a lot of people loved the fantasy of being the only ones who were in on the secret vision of how the world really works, and that's their idea. And that's why they use all that imagery of like the red pill or the blue pill, whichever pill it is that gives you the knowledge of how the world really works in the Matrix. Any of those things, it's all bullshit, by the way. I mean, but yeah,
Well,
you're right.
I don't know. I think that everyone feels like they are in on the real secret of how the world works. I don't think that's specific just to Nazis. And I think, to Drew's point, that everyone twists the facts to their own narrative too, not just fiction, but the actual facts or the alternative facts. You know, it's like whatever you want to, whatever your worldview is, you're going to bend everything to fit that, and anything that doesn't fit, you're going to dismiss it as not, as fake news or as not real. So I don't think that's unusual. I don't think that's specific just to Nazis. But anyway, how do we get back on? Can we get back on to whatever we were
Back to
actually
the
talking
plot?
about?
Sure.
I feel like we kind of went off on a tangent there.
So back in Hawkins, the other so that sort of ends the Nancy and Jonathan storyline, because next we find them, they'll come back just to help out in fighting off the bad guy, because the bad guy plot that our main team of Dustin, Will, Lucas, and Mike, what they're all working on is there is now a great fissure between the dark dimension called the Upside Down and our dimension. There are what they call demo dogs, which are these demonic creatures that are breaking loose. They are running loose in the lab, and they managed to kill basically everybody in the lab. And the bulk of the action in the last part, we have to talk about the exorcism, but
we have to talk about Bob.
yeah.
Well, also before, so recap too. We also have a bonding moment where they decide to take on the Demodogs, and bond as a team in that respect. At the same time, they're also trying to get Hopper back, who succumbed to the Upside Down, and they have to figure out how to rescue them, which bonds the rest of them as a family, because they've noticed that the drawings all over the house that get made are an actual map. So Bob, lovable.
Not they. Bob notices it, because Bob apparently is some kind of super genius that can see random drawings and decide that it's a map.
Well, he's wonderful. I mean, he's a tech guy. He solves problems. I'm a Bob of my company, actually.
Bob, this is when you realize that Bob is a nice guy. That Bob is not a bad guy, or if he's going to turn out to be one, it's going to be some point later that we can't believe, because he figures out that the map is a map of Hawkins and that they can use it. Bob is becoming one of the Goonies. He's becoming one of the friends, one of the gang that's will help them. And he never ever second. He'll ask a question or two, but he's not one of these people who's going to just call the police and have Joyce arrested for tying up her son and performing an exorcism. Which I know I'm kind of mixing up when things happen, but my point is he's in. He's all in to joining their adventure. Let's talk about the exorcism, and then we'll get to the big finale, which all takes place at the lab. So Will is essentially possessed. He is what Mike realized. Mike, the kind of the smart one of the group, Mike realizes Will's a spy. Will only has his own personality sometimes, and mainly he has been subsumed by an intelligence that is
and he realizes that even before it's not about the personality, it's about the fact that Will says, I can see what the monster sees, and so Mike says, well, then that means the monster can see what you see. So it's not even just that he's a spy, it's that he can, that he's that his personality's been taken over, which it has. Now, the personality thing comes out when he has amnesia about or it looks like amnesia, but it's really just the monster doesn't know these people. So when he's like, who are these people? I don't know you. It's not, I don't know, for some reason the shadow monster's able to access some things but not others, and so he can't tell who these people are. So he's like, I don't know who you are. You're probably a friend because you look like you're about Will's age, so I'm going to go with friend. You look like you're probably mom, so I'm going to go with mom.
Yeah.
But he's obviously not, Will's not there at all at that point. And it's only when they realize later that he's tapping out Morse code with his fingers that you know that he's actually is in there but not able to speak.
So this is how they figure out several things. That's how they figure out that the alien is a hive mind. I call it an alien. I'm sorry. This invader is a hive mind, and they also figure out that he's susceptible to heat, and so that's how they're going to try and free him. Tony, I interrupted you. I'm sorry.
One thing also to remember is this whole exorcism hive mind thing, to me, from the 80s, bears resemblance to Charles Wallace in Wrinkle in Time, where he gets possessed. Everybody in his family tries to convince him, but he's really a part of the it of that.
Yeah.
And I don't know if they intentionally did that, but considering how all of it fits together, I found that to be a touchstone for me because I've read those books like a million times.
Absolutely. Yeah, especially Charles Wallace being the sensitive one, the intelligent one. They treat Will so gingerly because he's so easily injured and so special. And Charles Wallace was, I'll bet you that is, maybe we're seeing these patterns in the Duffer Brothers don't know everything, but I'll bet there's something to that. That's a wonderful reach. Yeah, Wrinkle in Time. Absolutely. I want to talk about the action that takes place in the lab, which to me is all of a big climactic piece, although Drew was pointing out it actually is scattered over several pieces. But really towards the end, the real plot involves these creatures. These creatures have overrun the lab. And, so Paul Reiser, representing the lab, basically, he's in trouble, and he teams up with our friends. Really quickly, by the way, Paul Reiser kind of represents how the guys in the lab, just like the one that 11 didn't kill, are basically just worker bees. They're just people. They have sort of dark ideas about hiding the truth from the American people, but that's nothing new. But they're not like Paul Reiser is not a supervillain in the slightest. He's just a middle manager who is running this thing. So now, Drew, do you want to talk about what I think is the key thing that happens in the lab, which is when all of them have to escape, Bob becomes a real hero working closely with Paul Reiser.
Well, the thing I love about that scene is you have Hopper, who is essentially the action hero character of this show.
Mm-hmm.
You have 11 who has their superpowers, and then you have Hopper, who is just this take no shit 80s cop.
Yeah.
And he has to admit, because they start talking all of this computer stuff, he has to admit he's like, I have no idea. And Bob is like, okay, I have to go down here because I'm the only one that knows how to do this. I have to go down here to get the doors open because it's the Jurassic Park gambit.
Because I know
right
Basic.
Here. Yeah, because I know Basic.
That was one thing, like Basic. I know this is stupid, but
go ahead.
Run those mainframes with Basic. By the way, it doesn't work that way. It will never work that way. It sounds good because what do most people know? As a person whose job it is to do tech things, that was one of those. Why not just talk to somebody? I guess because most people would know Basic, but they're probably using some machine language or Pascal or COBOL or whatever banks use. Basic, you can't even compile it. Like, it doesn't work that way. I don't know. And like I said, I know this is stupid, but it's one of those, like, they've gotten so much right, and then just for plot contrivance,
I don't know why they said Basic. I mean, if people haven't heard of Basic, Basic is basically just a logic puzzle that helps teach you. I mean, it's a program,
it's a legit program.
No, it is. But my point is, if people don't remember it, he may as well have said COBOL or Fortran or any of these. It's weird that he chose to say Basic. It doesn't matter, But
it would probably be something even more low level at that point, which is why why people who know the languages that banks still use terrible, make tons of money. You can't really change them. It's part of why we had all the Y2K stuff, because these are old languages and people make shortcuts and all of that. It was just one of those things. I understand why they did it. It makes sense on a level. I kind of wish people would just talk to some tech person a little bit, and just throw them a bone and put them in the special thanks at the very least when doing this. But I don't know. It's not a huge deal. It's just one of the very few, like, oh, that's not no. But well, that's the way it is.
I still love that it was a problem that they couldn't shoot or punch.
Oh no, it's awesome. All of that's cool.
Yeah, Tony's just saying they should have called it a different computer language. True enough.
Fair enough. But like no matter how we got here, I like the fact that like Bob is down there. Bob's the one who is, not an action hero in the slightest, and he's the one that's having to do this. And you have nervous Paul Reiser, who, at this point seems like he's kind of solidly a good guy. When you get to the point where like Bob's trying to make his escape through all these monster hellhounds, essentially, I mean, for lack of a better term, that stuff is generally very suspenseful in a way that a lot of the other stuff on the show is not, because this character is not one of the main characters. He's not been shown to be physically capable. It's really nice, that he gets his moment, but of course, right when he gets reunited with Winona Ryder, he gets the most gruesome death in possibly the entire history of the show.
Yes, I think that's right. I think that's true.
Actually,
it's pretty awful. He does. He gets a terrible death. But there are no good deaths. But I mean, it's just as shocking as seeing a snake come out of Barb's mouth last season. It's pretty awful.
But we didn't see Barb die.
Yeah.
Like when the Demogorgon grabs Barb, we just see her get grabbed. Like we have these demo dogs, like no pun intended, dogpiling on him and chewing on him. It's pretty grisly stuff.
I agree with you. I agree. It was hard. It was hard to watch. I'm not objecting to it. I think it fits. But I agree with you completely. I think you said that very well. And that's when he dies, and Hopper works to sort of get everybody out. Hopper is the only one also with combat experience. Actually, we don't know that about Bob. We don't know one way or the other. He's the right age that he very well could have been drafted. We don't know. We just have no idea if Bob has ever run down a hallway for his life before. But Hopper clearly is, because Vietnam turns up again and again, and it's Hopper that finally gets them out the door. But it wouldn't have been possible without Bob's sort of glorious charge, and he almost makes it. In that instance, he's like, I want to say it's Charles Bronson at the end of The Dirty Dozen, who is almost going to make it and then gets shot before he gets onto the truck that everybody else is on. Anyway. So how does it end? It ends really with the
11 confronts the Mind Flayer.
Yeah, they have given a name to the central entity that is trying to bring its own gigantic hugeness through this gate that is at the bottom of the elevator in the lab, and before they destroy it and destroy the demo dogs and everything, they simultaneously want to make sure that they have cut the link between Will and this entity. And so while half the characters are busy doing an exorcism to try to drive the spirit out of Will, Hopper and 11 go down to the pit just for 11 to use her newly augmented powers since her training with Kali to close this gate. And this is a classic fantasy adventure light show scene where the characters are really reacting to a lot of shining light and screaming and holding up their arms. It's okay. If it works, it works. And here, you're like, Will should be able to summon up the imaginary psychic power to close a gate. Yes. So, when you think about it, it's kind of funny. It's a foregone conclusion that she's going to be able to. You still feel very, very, very excited when she actually manages to close the gate. So I just think that's funny that this is a thing that we do.
That's a really visually dramatic scene. I mean, it's just amazing because they're on this, they're floating, and they really are on this elevator type of thing, whatever you call those, the elevators that they
It's
use
an elevator.
scaffolding. Yeah. They really are on one of those in a big studio, and she was actually getting really sick because of the moving around and all that. So a lot of it's real when she just looks like she's like collapsing and not feeling well. But it's a really amazing scene to see her kind of stitching up the gate with her psychic powers that she wouldn't have been able to do if she hadn't met 8, because 8 told her to channel her anger, and so that's what she's able to do, is to make this, to do this work. So I think that was a really exciting scene, and definitely shows us that our heroes are Eleven and Hopper for real, in this story, although everybody plays their part for sure.
Yeah. And as we go through this, of course, there's no way we can hit on everything. I gotta mention that we haven't even talked about, what everything that's going on with Max and everything that's going on with her mulleted bully brother. Yeah, if we had a third episode, we could probably dig deeper into some of this stuff. But once 11 has returned as the hero and closes the gate, now it's time for a denouement. And the denouement, basically, in the last of the 9th episode, basically just sort of wraps everything up for us. Is there going to be a sequel? Who knows? This one has a much more closed story than the last one. If there's a new story, it could be almost anything. They could wind up ripping off the Explorers next, because in this one, we wind up closing out with a prom. Is it called the prom, or is it whatever it is?
It's snowball.
It's the snowball. Yes, it's the Enchantment Under the Sea dance.
Eighth grade dance.
Yeah. And, so everybody's all about that. Hopper, who has been, taking care of 11, now we find officially is going to make her a daughter. He is going to adopt her. That is super sweet. That is super, super sweet. And he lets her go to the dance. And soon enough, he'll be able to let her live in the open, because she'll officially be his daughter. And the boys all
that was a little odd for me, I have to say. I didn't understand why Paul Reiser was recommending that he keep her hidden for another year, and he lets her out for just that one ball. But I'm like, why did he?
I guess in case Matthew Modine came looking for her. I have no idea. I don't know.
Well, I mean, you talk about what the third season might be about. I think we're gonna get into more into what this sort of conspiracy of mad science is. Because there is the question of, is Dr. Brenner alive? Is he not? What exactly are they up to with all these experiments on people that are creating these sort of super soldiers? You say it was closed up. It's really not. They do have a lot of questions. I mean, they even end the last shot that they show that the monster is still watching them.
Yeah, he's still there, but he's in the Upside Down. Now, I mean, presumably he could have always been in the Upside Down, and it's just that there's always been it's always been sealed off, and that's why when 11 opened that gate is when stuff started to come through. But theoretically, it's just like hell. Hell's just always going to be where hell's going to be, and you get there or you don't. So I don't think that's necessarily ominous for the next season. I think there has to be more stuff with Matthew Modine coming back, if in fact he's still alive. And I think Billy and his dad, or I guess it's his dad and stepmom, and then Max's mom and stepdad. But anyway, that storyline is going to be bigger, because they introduced the fact that his dad is super abusive, and that's why Billy is such a bully. And so I think they will become bigger characters, maybe. But I don't know what's going to be the case with Will, and if he'll continue to be connected to the Shadow Monster or not.
I don't know. I mean, in the last episode, it ended, and we clearly saw Hopper in cahoots with the lab, and we saw.
Well, he's been
there were a couple of.
Yeah, I'm just saying the whole time, because he made the deal that's why he was able to get out. He and Joyce were able to get out.
Yeah. But that's absolutely true. I'm just saying I have no idea where this is going. But we end with a sweet moment. We end with the school dance, and also with Hopper and Joyce just sort of hanging out by the car. Will there be a romance here in the future? Who knows? Right now we're still mourning Bob, so they just hang out and just sort of enjoy being the older characters of the series. This whole thing really did look like a teen, an 80s teen movie, which is perfect. It was a perfect way to wrap it up, wrap it up with a dance. And in fact, we should wrap up our discussion. Let's get to our final thoughts. I think the order that I took it in was, Tony, Julia, Drew, and then I'll go. Tony, where does this leave us? What are your final thoughts about Stranger Things Part 2?
I really enjoyed it. I try to take each series as it comes back, each season as its own thing. I try not to get too hyped, but I thought it was really solid. It had a lot of great stuff. I saw another friend who kind of wanted a totally different thing, but part of it also seemed to be that the difference between I probably would have been one of these kids or wanted to be one of these kids or, they're my people, right? Later on, maybe some of the punk people, I was always more metal, but in that general outsider kind of way, those were my people. And I gravitate towards that and understand it. And I know that they're definitely tugging on the nostalgia pretty hard, sometimes in a very kind of manipulative way. But it works for me, and I like how dark it got. I like what they have done with it and where they took it. And I kind of wish that some of the people who maybe disliked it, I don't dislike the previous season. I don't think that this is gonna change their mind. But in some ways, if this had been the first season, I think perhaps they may have thought of it differently. I'm not positive about that. That's just my theory as I was watching it.
So yeah, I think I was really excited last week to talk about the nostalgia part, because that's probably my favorite part. It's just the trip down memory lane for me personally. But since we've gotten more into the plots and the characters, I would say that the plot of the middle schoolers is my favorite part. I really enjoy it. I love all the characters. I love Dustin. He's so funny and adorable, but they're all so cute. 11 is incredible, and I guess I agree with you guys that her storyline with the punks doesn't really feel like it fits in so much, but I thought it was important, and I thought we learned a lot from it. And so that's all great. And then I really like the adults as well. I think I had to grow to like Bob. At first I thought he was going to be a bad guy. Then I thought maybe he was going to have hero powers, and then I was like, oh, he's just a nice guy. And then he turns out to be a hero anyway. So I think his character arc was interesting, but it wasn't. I didn't love him because I really kind of wanted her to be with Hopper, and I'm glad, even though I think that she got over Bob a little too quickly there at the end. But I'm glad that leaves the door open for them to have a romance maybe in the future. But so it's a good story and great series. Like I say, visually just amazing, and they just did so many neat things. So I'm just looking forward to next season, and I wish it wasn't so far away.
Very good. Drew, what do you got for us?
Like I said last week, I think this was very much Aliens to the original season's Alien, and I stand by that. I think that this was more of everything, but in a really good way. I disagree that this wraps everything up. I think that they actually left a lot of things hanging, and I feel like that they actually can really go even bigger with the world if they do come back with a third season. I mean, I think it's almost inevitable that we're going to see a third one of these, but certainly it could be viewed as an ending. But I mean, even the choice of using every breath you take is what they end on with that monster. That seems to me that we have not seen the last of the Mind Flayer. We haven't seen the last of the Upside Down, and I certainly don't think that we've seen the end of the conspiracy. I think that they could go even crazier with a third season if they choose to do that. So I, like Julia, await eagerly to see what is coming our way.
Wonderful. I enjoyed this very much, and it's funny. Last week we were debating, is there any downside to the way we consume these things now, where we watch them all at once? But that could be argued with any well-made streaming story. It had nothing to do with this actual series, which I think is really beautiful. I'm really glad this thing exists. It strikes me as sort of one of the most wonderful success stories of our age, where a couple of guys that nobody knows gets together, manages to make a really great piece with a really great cast, including some recognizable people. Yeah, everything has just sort of fired correctly here for me, and so it's a miniseries. So like with a lot of those, we spent 2 episodes on it, but I'm really glad that we did. There's a heck of a lot to talk about. So cool. That's our discussion of Stranger Things. We'll probably be back next year with another one. Let's get some endorsements and go in the same order. Tony, I know that you've been super busy, but do you have anything to share with us as far as like stuff that you've been reading or watching or playing or whatever?
I have not really. I will shout out to people who have bought the Rise from Fire album, because that's awesome. And in fact, Randy, who I know through originally, I think through the podcast, just as a listener and just cool person, sent me a note. Hey, I bought the album. I got it today. And
oh, good.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. We're putting it out there, and we hope to be playing around a lot more. I really appreciate that. If you listen to that, can I say I'm both super happy and slightly envious that for the first time ever, our podcast likes on Facebook are more than Deserts of Mars, which was my original first page I ever put together, if I'm not mistaken. So we're doing the right thing. Although it, like I said, it made me slightly envious. It's all part of the same group of things that I do, so it's not that big a deal. But it was one of those things I noticed, and thanks for tuning in to this, as well as liking all the other stuff we do and listening to the stuff we do. And thanks everybody. I think my endorsement is thank you for allowing us to continue to hopefully entertain you through music, through this, through everything else that you and then anything else we've passed on. So appreciate it.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Julia, what are you going to endorse for us this week?
Well, I don't know if I'm going to jump on Drew's endorsement or if he's got something different, but I loved Thor Ragnarok. It was so good. I really enjoyed it. I had such a good time. And Jason hasn't seen it yet, so no spoilers for him. But he had a lot of work to do this weekend. But I took the girl. I went with my kids, and oh my gosh, it was such a fun film. I highly recommend it. Even if you haven't seen, I actually don't remember if I'd even seen the first Thor movie. I mean, I had seen all the Avengers movies, but this was just different. It was super fun and some really great cameos and some neat effects and the best use of the Immigrant Song I've seen in a movie yet, even though of course it gets used a whole lot. So yeah, that's my recommendation. Yeah,
it does. Yeah. Wow. Okay. Excellent. And I know I need to get out and watch it. Everybody's been saying it's wonderful, and I was working on a comic book plot this weekend, and I think I got it together. It was really complicated, and I think I got it together, but I missed Thor. But I'll try and catch it sometime this week. Drew, what about you?
First of all, I actually haven't seen Thor yet, so
okay.
I don't know. I don't know when I don't know when I am going to see it. Actually, the next movie, strangely, the next movie, or perhaps not strangely, the next movie I am likely to see is actually going to be Murder on the Orient Express.
Oh yeah, I'm looking forward to that.
But I am endorsing. Well, this is kind of weird. I am endorsing a play that is in a new Kim Newman short story collection. The short story collection is called Anno Dracula 1899, which is a little misleading because it leads you to believe that it is a new Anno Dracula novel. It is not. It has got one short story that takes place in that universe, but the rest of it is unrelated short stories. But the best one in it by far is actually a play or a script for a play, and it's called Frankenstein on Ice, and it's takes place in the near future when the global warming has caused a glacier to melt open and the Frankenstein monster is unleashed, and it is so neat the way he reconciles the Mary Shelley version and the Boris Karloff version into one character in a way that totally works. And I really, really enjoyed reading it. I would love to see a staged version of it at some point. But it was just a lot of fun. I got a big kick out of it. Obviously, the other thing that I would have to keep plugging, and I will continue to plug, is that I have a new issue of Halloween Man up on Comixology. It came out the week of Halloween, right before we recorded the previous Stranger Things episode. But I feel like that maybe that kind of got lost in the shuffle. You should check it out. It's only $1.99. It's got really good art. It's got a really awesome cover. Please check it out and let me know what you think.
Listen, I totally believe in log rolling. I feel like we do the podcast, and I think there's never any harm in saying what you're working on. And I've never heard anybody even complain about it. So yeah, always promote whatever you got coming out. Absolutely. Gosh, okay. I have an endorsement that is nothing I have anything to do with at all. But here it is. And if I've endorsed it before, I apologize. It's worth saying again. The Orville is a show that you must be watching if you like Star Trek of the classic age. If you dig Star Trek back when it had like heart and happy endings and overhead lighting, The Orville is the show to be watching. It is capturing Star Trek: The Next Generation in every way possible. The openings, when you come out of commercials, the sounds, the incidental music, the lighting, the video, everything. It is the weirdest experiment in can somebody with more money than he knows how to do with executive produce a Star Trek: The Next Generation series without getting sued. It is
But it's way
wonderful.
funnier. Way funnier than Star Trek.
Yeah, I mean, it is super funny.
Intentionally funny.
Intentionally
it's
funny.
hilarious.
Yeah, because they've written it as a it just has a very light tone. It has the light tone of a lot of the lighter Star Trek episodes, although to be honest, many of the episodes are actually fairly dark or get into very Star Trek-y kind of ethical questions that I'm really impressed by. And so when people first saw this thing came out, they saw it was by Seth MacFarlane, and they were like, oh, this is going to be this sort of gross out humor thing, but everybody's going to be wearing Star Trek uniforms. But it wasn't that way at all. Seth MacFarlane is not making a parody of Star Trek. He is making Star Trek, and he just took all the logos off. I mean, it has to be seen to be believed how
I think he's making
perfectly
a comedy
this is.
version of Star Trek. I mean, I think it's more of a comedy than Star Trek is.
It might be, but my point is, people really expected, when they heard that it was going to have a comedic edge, they expected that this was going to be Family Guy in space. And when what they got was Star Trek with more one-liners, they were really turned off by that. But fans are finding the show. It has already been renewed for a new season, so it doesn't matter. You know,
it seems to have caused a big schism in Star Trek fandom. Like, because there seems to be like one faction that likes the new Star Trek TV show Discovery, and one faction that likes this. And it's like, no, this is
it's so dumb that you have to choose. You don't have to choose.
You don't. But I'm fascinated by the fact that there's Trekkie infighting over I would be see for me, I would be like, oh wow, there's more of this thing that I like for me to enjoy. Like I never quite get it when this stuff happens. Like I'm constantly astounded that there are people in the Ghostbusters fan community that are complaining about the amount of Ghostbusters comic books that are being put out, and I'm a bit astounded by that. So the fact that there's Trekkie infighting is both interesting and amusing to me.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't know how to best explain fans other than to say that they tend to eat themselves alive, and I don't know why. But it is a flip side to fandom that has always been with us and has always been a little bit ugly. Tony, you and I have talked about this a million times, how for some reason it's like sometimes we just can't have nice things. Like for some reason, everybody's gonna be like, "No, I like this John Carpenter movie more than that John Carpenter movie," and they're getting into stupid fights. And what's the matter with you?
Yeah, I can read Marvel and DC and have zero problems with that, and manga, no less.
Right?
Because what I like is things that I like. I have
Yeah.
zero. I look at it from afar and don't understand why you have to choose.
Yeah.
I have no problems, reading X-Men and Justice League or whatever. And or even choosing movies. Look, I don't like a lot of the DC movies because just how they are. But if they were good, I don't relish when one of them fails and the other one succeeds or whatever, or have to. I don't understand it. It's not.
Yeah.
This is kind of an echo of the Shin Godzilla versus MonsterVerse Godzilla, which to me, my whole thing is like, oh, this is just a really good time to be a Godzilla fan.
I don't care, man. There's lots of Godzilla on screen. Oh no.
Yeah.
Terrible.
Yeah.
Although I still didn't like the other one, so what can I say? I don't know. I chose on that one, but I
mean, you don't have to like it, but like you also have a Godzilla anime coming out here in I think a few weeks actually. So like that's kind of amazing. You'd think that everybody would be really happy. So the fact that like there's 2 Star Trek-y shows on TV, like if I was I mean I'm a casual Star Trek fan at best. Like I enjoy Star Trek, but I'm not going to pretend that I'm like this hardcore Star Trek guy. But like if that was like my jam, like I would be like super stoked that there were essentially 2 Star Trek TV shows going on.
Because what's going on here is that Seth MacFarlane has sort of left all the sensibilities of normal Seth MacFarlane at the door, and he has a very clear creative vision. Now, he could screw it up in the next season. I mean, lots of shows do that, right? Where the next season that comes around and go, oh, we heard these critiques, and so we've mixed it up a little bit, and they kind of spoil the broth. But in this first season, he has a very clear vision. We're not doing the 60s. We're not doing the late 70s movie Treks. We're not doing classic Trek. We're not doing, the new world. We are doing pure 1990s television Trek. That is what we're doing, and it is perfect. it is, and it's really great when you see an artist go, I know exactly what I'm doing, and just you watch, and that's I'm really impressed. I don't even like the Family Guy, by the way, and
maybe Seth MacFarlane's a big Star Trek fan, and we just didn't know that.
I think you'd have to assume he is. I'm just guessing, but
I
honestly,
guess. Wait, doesn't Patrick Stewart do a voice on American Dad?
I don't know. I have no idea. I don't watch
I seem to vaguely remember that. So that may someone Google that when we're not recording.
Another big secret of how the Orville is put together, once he has that vision, is of course Brannon Braga is a director on it often. Brannon Braga was a supervising producer of Next Generation. Lots of the creatives, directors, writers, score, everything. A lot of these guys are literally guys from Star Trek: The Next Generation. They're, it's so funny. It's as though, pick a sitcom. It's as though you were really into Happy Days, and then Happy Days went off the air, and so like 20 years later, you just started making Happy Days, and you changed everybody's name. It makes me feel like all y'all who are doing fanfic, you can make your fanfic into actual work, and go ye therefore.
Well, you basically hit on the exact point I was going to make. So basically, he's made really expensive Star Trek fan fiction, which, in fairness, I mean, that's a thing. Penny Dreadful was essentially really expensive Universal Monsters / Hammer horror fan fiction. So this is where we're at.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, that's enough. We have gone on for a long time, but it was well worth it. We talked about some cool stuff, and Stranger Things 2 definitely deserved some time. Guys, thank you so much. For those of you listening, if you enjoy the show, come to the Facebook page, like the Facebook page, tell your friends, leave reviews and ratings on iTunes, because they get sent out to all the other places that gather up podcast reviews, and it helps people find the show. So find us in iTunes, like us and leave a review. And if you leave a review, I will read it on the show. And I really appreciate you guys being here. We'll be back next week. I don't even remember right now what it is we're going to be discussing. Oh yeah, I think it's Martin. I think we're doing a George Romero picture. So that'll be fun. Thank you. Everybody have a wonderful evening.
Night.
Right.
Night.